States. It's now time to take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe. We begin at home with defense, as the Minister of Defense, Mohammed Abubakar, has downplayed claims by the House of Representatives that terrorists carrying out attacks in the country possess superior weaponry compared to the Nigerian armed forces. At the ministerial briefing in Abuja, the minister described such claims as untrue, insisting that the military is better equipped and motivated to tackle insurgency in the country. Arise News chief correspondent Ferdinand Durohoa was at the ministerial briefing and reports.
The seventh ministerial briefing of the 2025 series has the Minister of Defense and the Minister of Environment presenting their scorecards, addressing the emergence of new terrorist groups springing up across the country and the recent spate of attacks in several geopolitical zones. The Minister of Defense, Mohammed Abubakar, attributes it to the escalation of conflict in the Sahel. Abubakar says Nigeria cannot be assessed in isolation as the challenges in the Sahel, especially with the militarization of Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso, increasing armed conflict within the region.
More could have happened, but for the support, for the help and the dedication of our armed men. If you know what is happening in Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso today, even in Chad, even 3 days ago, the whole, camp just across the border in Cameroon was attacked by these people, and a lot of weapons taken, including an MRAP. So the situation around us, it is Google, find out how many military barracks and personnel were killed in Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso in the last 2 weeks alone, and in Chad. You will now understand what I'm talking about.
Reacting to claims by some members of the House of Representatives that terrorists carrying out attacks in the country possess superior weaponry compared to the Nigerian armed forces, the minister dismissed it as false.
What we saw up to today are normal small drones, civilian drones. They just tie bomb to it, improvise bomb and just drop.
Giving a breakdown of the successes recorded since the start of the Bola Tinubu administration, Abubakar says more than 300 terrorist kingpins have been killed by the military. The statistics further shows that over 13,000 terrorists were neutralized, 9,821 hostages rescued, and over 124,000 terrorists surrendered. Also on ground to deliver his scorecard is the Minister of Environment, Malam Balarabe Lawal. He noted that the ministry has implemented strategic measures to curb unsustainable agricultural practices, excessive logging, and infrastructure deficits. Of interest is the plan to sell $186 million of green bonds in 2 offerings before the end of the year. The minister says Nigeria is seeking to fund an ambitious economic transformation plan.
But our own that will be done in the next 2 weeks is 50 billion. And this one will be directed mainly at afforestation, water security, and e-mobility in mass transportation, and also in trying to address the issue of clean energy.
The ministerial series are meant to showcase the achievements of the federal government in the build-up to the administration's 2nd anniversary.
I therefore call on my colleagues, or media professionals and editors, to be discerning in their reportage. We must deny these groups the undue publicity they crave. We must take them off the front pages and accurately report them as the criminals that they are.
Ferdinand Duroha, Arise News.
Now, the Senate at plenary on Wednesday passed 2 of the tax reform legislations, namely the Nigeria Revenue Service Establishment Bill 2025 and the Nigeria Tax Administration Bill 2025. This followed the presentation and consideration of the report of its Committee on Finance, chaired by Senator Sani Musa. After the clause-by-clause consideration of the two bills, the Red Chamber retains the 7.5% being collected by the federal government from consumers of goods and services as value-added tax, VAT. The Red Chamber approved that the federal government should be entitled to 10% of the total revenue collected as taxes, while the states and local governments get 55% and local governments 35%, respectively. It also approved the renaming of the Federal Inland Revenue Service as the Nigeria Revenue Service, NRS. Similarly, it approved the constitution of the Board of Directors for the proposed NRS with a non-executive chairman heading the board of the agency, while the chief executive officer would be addressed as the executive vice chairman. Now to economics. As the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, has removed Nigeria from its list of debtor countries. In a report titled Total IMF Credit Outstanding Movement from May 1, 2025 to May 6, 2025, obtained on the multilateral institution's website yesterday, Nigeria was not listed among its debtors, which has a total of 91 developing and least developed countries owing the fund a total of over 100 billion as at the 6th of May 2025. The total IMF credit outstanding refers to the total amount of unpaid and outstanding principal due to the fund from its member countries. This includes both outstanding loans under current arrangements and those that have expired. In a post on his X handle, Senior Special Assistant to the President on Digital Engagement Strategy and New Media, Otega Ogra, said the development was a signal of discipline, reform, and strategic reset by the Tinubu-Shettima administration in restructuring, and I quote, our finances to enable us to be better placed for a prosperous future, end quote. Now, last in our headlines today, the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, the accident investigation body of the United States, has released its final report on the helicopter crash that killed Herbert Wigwe, former Group Chief Executive Officer of Access Holdings plc, along with his family and others. According to the report, the crash, which claimed the lives of Wigwe, his wife Doreen, their first son Chizi, and Abimbola Ogunbanjo, the former group chairman of the Nigerian Exchange Group plc, has been attributed to a combination of pilot disorientation and the helicopter company's negligence. The NTSB's report indicated that the primary cause of the crash was the pilot's decision to continue the flight under visual flight rules, that's VFR, despite encountering instrument meteorological conditions, IMC. The report stated that this decision led to the pilot becoming spatially disoriented and ultimately losing control of the aircraft, which crashed into the terrain. I do hope that the release of this report is able to bring a degree of closure to those who continue to mourn the loss of Herbert Wigwe, his family, and of course Abimbola Ogunbanjo as well. May their souls rest in peace.
I mean, very sad one, very sad report this morning. And Vimbai, what that points to is negligence. So the question is, will the family want to take that up? Because there's a ground to open a case against the airline company. Because if there were conversations about the altimeter of the craft not working, if there were conversations about, instrumental and spatial implements in the plane not working, and the pilot still went ahead, to fly the plane. In fact, there was an allegation of a text message sent. There was a text interaction about the case raised of an altimeter, and there was no resolution on that before the pilot decided to fly. So the question is, with all of those concerns raised, why did the pilot decide to fly? And there are many grounds to be able to look at the case. The sad thing is, it's not going to bring Herbert Wigwe back and his family, but people have a right to know, one. Two, people have a right to hold people accountable. So since this report is out now, then we'll see how accountability will happen. But it's a sad one that such a level of gross negligence, as it were, claimed the life of a star banker in Nigeria. And it's very sad. Nothing will bring them back, but people must be held accountable. Secondly, the story of the tax bill. A couple of things now have happened. We don't have FIRs any longer. We now have Nigerian Revenue Service. We've gotten some clarity as regards, derivation. It's not going to be the place of consumption. We now have some clarity that the federal government will take 10% of all of these revenues, the state government will take 55%, and the local government will take 35%. So please, this is the time to call on the governor of your states, because that's added revenue to the threshold. So what are they doing with these monies? We now also know that there are a couple of penalty clauses there that if you don't file on time, over 100,000 and all of that, we know that there's a tax ombud, and we also know that there are tax commissioners also. There's going to be a tax appeal committee that's going to be able to review all of this. We now know that a lot of work has been done as regards to derivation. We know the position equity takes. We know the position the population of a state takes. These are the bone of contention brought forward by some senators from the northern part of the country that have been sorted. We now know the talk about, the tertiary institution fund, the TED fund and the like. Those things will still be added, so you can still get funding from that through taxation. So we've seen some clarity, but the law is always a working document. Definitely after we start to use and implement, people will need to tweak and tweak again. So I still see many, upgraded bill to this bill going out there. As regards the IMF payments, it's a welcome development from Nigeria, but I would still like to see a final statement by the IMF itself, because I checked through most of the releases on the IMF website, even up to from the 2nd of May, and we have not seen, anything as regards to finality of payment. But, as a matter of fact, I did check through, the IMF link. I didn't see Nigeria's name there on the list of debtors. We also would like to get some ratification, by the DMO, which will be a welcome development for us. We remember during COVID-19, we took some loans, over 3 billion, and we've been paying that for a while. At some point, there were some reports that were saying that we still have some pending 590 million to be able to pay till 2029. That was as reported by Punch a couple of days ago. But if you check the list, there's nothing there. So we'll await the final ratification. But it just shows Nigeria in a good state, and it just shows that, we're doing a whole lot more work as we're paying our loans to be able to put us in a better state. But what will help us going further is if we can cut our quota according to our size. For so many years now, we've had a need to borrow because we've been having a lot of budget deficit. When are we even going to turn the corner to a part of budget surplus? When are we going to be able to stabilize our economy and produce more to be able to ensure that we get, the benefits of this flotation of our currency? I think those are the attendant problems we should be able to fix. Till today, we've been talking about producing over 2 million barrels per day. That's been difficult for us. But we need to produce to be able to get more and more money to our economy, to be able to get this tax bill, on the road, because the revenue you will get from this tax bill is also incumbent on your productive capacity as a nation.
Okay, where do I start from? Let me start with IMF. Now, when IMF says, Nigeria is not indebted to it, what it simply means is that Nigeria has been able to clear its legacy debt. And if that is the case, truly, then it's a very big achievement for the Tinubu administration. That's what they call the legacy account debt. There's the current account. It's like when you owe a bank money and you have not been paying, you have not been performing. Then when you pay, they will say, okay, you are not owing again. Now you have, you can take more loans. So what it means is that Nigeria can now retain its drawing rights with the IMF. So I think that we should see it in a positive light as an achievement, both for President Tinubu and also the economic managers within the administration. That, I think, is what is important about our story. That's the main editorial point, in my view. Now, as to the tax bills. Now, we've been on this tax bill controversy since October 2024. You recall that at the time, there were 4 bills. Now, 2 of those bills have now been passed by the Senate. At that time, governors, particularly from the northern part of the country, particularly senators from the northern part of the country, raised an alarm. They said that those tax bills, either the establishment bill or the revenue service bill or the administration bill, there were 4 in number, 4 bills, were discriminatory. And so there was that back and forth. We had Mr. Taiwo Yedele on this program, and he tried to explain that in fact there was consultation, and that in fact the whole idea of it is to overhaul tax administration for the benefit of all the states and for the benefit of the average Nigerian. But in any case, what this signals, two of those bills, the Nigerian Revenue Service Establishment Bill and the Nigerian Tax Administration Bill now being passed by the Senate, shows that, look, all the consultations, all the attempts to explain the bills again to those who objected to them have worked. So that's one in that regard. Now, the second thing is that all of these bills, well, I have not read them. So, but I'm sure they will be available almost immediately in the public space. And other concerned parties, stakeholders, will read these bills. And when they read these bills, we will expect that there will be responses, there will be reactions along this line. The controversy that we had last year over these bills, we would like to see what those people who were aggrieved then, what they now think, particularly with regard to the change of the phrase, the derivation, to place of consumption. Now, that was a big issue then, because there are many Nigerians who say, look, we consume beer in Lagos. Why should people in the north, where they don't drink beer, where beer is against the Sharia laws in some of those 19 northern states, why should they be collecting VAT on the consumption of beer? Now, if you consume beer or alcohol in the south, doesn't mean literally that the tax in that regard will come to you. But the main argument, as put by IMF World Bank, is that what Nigeria needs to do is not to place more tax on the people. It is to expand, widen the tax base. If this law achieves that objective, then it will have helped, because it's about increasing revenue and giving opportunities and ensuring equity. Finally, the true test of any law is in its implementation. And that's why I say, okay, now this law has been passed by the Senate. It is only when we test it that we will know the effect that it will have. In other words, any piece of legislation is a living subject. It takes on a life of its own during implementation. And then when you measure the outcomes, there's always room for review. However, I think it's an important development. As for the Wigwe matter, which you brought up, I've always said it on this program, that safety is number one in aviation, which was why the other day when we were discussing Air Peace, I was very quick to say, look, Air Peace took the right decision by saying that if meteorological agency workers were protesting, then it will not be safe to fly because you don't take unnecessary risk. Now, the helicopter company in this tragic incident, we were told that the radar alternator or whatever, was not working. It was defective, and yet they allowed the pilot to fly. They had worked on it. They saw that they could not solve it. Is it alternator? No, planes don't use alternator. I think alimeter. It's called radar alimeter. Now, and then they allowed the helicopter to fly. That's number one point that the NTSB has pointed out. Even the pilot himself knew that there was a problem with that helicopter, and he still decided to fly. And then they said he got involved in what they call spatial disorientation. And then, we Nigerians are now faced with this tragedy of negligence, pilot's error, resulting in the death of very important members of the Nigerian community. The family can sue, negligence in law, whether it's tortious liability, street liability, whatever it is, you can claim damages. But the unfortunate thing is that they've robbed us of the genius of Herbert Wigwe and his wife, and the promise, the brilliant promise of his son, and also, the lawyer who died along with them. The bottom line is that safety is very important in aviation. As for the Minister of Defense saying that, Nigeria is doing well, the troops are doing well, with the battle against insurgency and terrorism, my response is, what do you expect him to say? As a rule, the government will never criticize the military establishment. But what we know, with what we have seen in Borno, in Benue, in Plateau, that the Tinubu administration, the government of Nigeria, needs to do more in the direction of ensuring the safety, security, the welfare of the Nigerian. The minister could not have said anything otherwise.
All right, let me pick up from defense where Dr. Abati has left off, which is a summary of what happened yesterday as the Minister of Defense gave us that briefing. One salient point that I thought was important to pick out from that was the fact that the Minister of Defense also feels that the security summit as proposed by the Senate is not necessarily the most critical thing we need to do at the moment. He said that what is required right now is a quick and urgent re-strategy. I did not quote him verbatim. In essence, that is what he said, that it's time. Yes, a summit will be good for the sake of getting input and so forth. However, what is more critical right now is a strategy that will allow the military to be able to tackle the menace as it is. He shared information about how in Ajaokuta we find that we're actually manufacturing our own drones locally, and I hope that's something that we can discuss further as we do have an interview around defense and security issues later on. From there, I'll go to VAT. Now, with VAT, the biggest issue here, or the biggest issue around the tax bills, is what will happen to this money? How will this money be spent? There's a huge focus that needs to be put on the subnationals. There was a report released just a few days ago, which was a great surprise to many, but it was a breath of fresh air, which documented the fact that the majority of states have been able to pay a significant amount of their debt from 2023 to 2024, as the numbers reflected. You saw somebody like Jigawa, Ondo, Ebonyi at the top of the list. They've reduced their indebtedness, Jigawa, for example, by over 90%, which is a welcome development. So now, if we are seeing additional revenue being added to the states, we expect that there will be increased productivity in those states, there will be increased development in those states, and we also expect to see a decrease in state borrowing. So that's one place we need to hold accountable. The governors are now the ones in the hot seat. Number two is the issue of local government autonomy. We are going to see increased revenue going to the local governments, yet we are not seeing the local government autonomy being implemented. This is unfortunate. Because we now ask ourselves, how is all of this going to trickle down? This ruling for local government autonomy is over a year old now, yet its implementation is still hanging in the balance. However, we are still creating more legislation that empowers local governments, gives them more money. However, we're not able to get that money into their pockets. This is an indictment. So what we need to also put on the front burner as all of these things are happening, because there's several moving parts, is to ensure that the local governments are in a position to actually receive their funds so that they too can be held accountable at their own level in the states. Now, I'm moving very quickly. Let's move to the IMF now. Now, I followed the IMF story with keen interest as I saw the first report that was released by the IMF recorded Nigeria had Nigeria on the list and recorded Nigeria's outstanding credit as zero. Another one on that list which had a similar reading was Dominican Republic. 24 hours or so after that, the IMF retracted that particular report and shared the one which is currently on their website, which removes both Dominican Republic and Nigeria from that list, which affirms, because if they've put zero, then surely those countries shouldn't be on that list. Well, maybe it's a technicality from within the IMF. However, upon doing further research and further exploring further for the findings, one was able to see that, yes, indeed, the principal amount of that debt, which is the 3.4 billion that was taken in 2020 during the COVID era under the rapid financing instrument, has been paid. However, the charges accrued are still outstanding. So I think it is still a massive achievement. I think it's important for the information to be framed within the correct context, which is that the principal amount is out. However, based on the projections on the IMF website of payments expected to that organization from Nigeria, we have $36 million per annum that is said to be due to the IMF every year until 2045. That's according to the IMF website. So we'll continue. It's still a welcome development. I think it's still something to celebrate, but I think it's also important for those who speak on behalf of the presidency to contextualize this information so that Nigerians can appreciate it. Massive, massive, massive achievement indeed.